Hi, my name is Crystal Hayes with Elegance Lamps, and I'm in beautiful Seattle, Washington, United States. And I'd like to talk to you about my art and how I began making what I make. It did begin as a young person. When I was a teenager, I very much enjoyed making embroidery. I did a lot of stitching and sewing. I made some of my own clothes. And then my first real job as a young person was at a fabric store. And so this was wonderful exposure. I learned about all of the different textures and weaves, and I was surrounded by beautiful things, notions, and it was inspirational. I loved the color and the feel of it, and it was wonderful to be exposed to all the people who would come in who shared a passion for creating. Most of them were creating clothing, but there were quite a few artists as well who would come in looking for unusual textiles. And so that was my early exposure. And in terms of, making lamps and lampshades, I would have to say that I was actually in my late 20s when that happened. My mother had a lampshade that was quite old. I really don't know how old it was, but it was beautiful. It was covered in silk and had beads on it. And unfortunately, the silk was tearing. And she knew that I liked to sew, so she handed me the lampshade and said, "Can you fix this?" And I had never done anything like it before. And unfortunately, when I took the silk off of the frame fell apart. So I needed to go find a new frame and something in a similar style, which was just very unusual for the time. And I was able to find a company that actually made the wire frames for this type of lampshade with all the interesting shapes and styles. And so I purchased a few, and that's how it all started. In the fabric store that I worked as a young person, I was exposed to some fabrics that actually have a difficult time finding today. A lot of crepe backs, silks, and satins. I mean, it's very easy to find satin now. But what I found interesting was the way that the fabrics would drape. One of the responsibilities of the people working in the store was to drape the bolts so that a customer could walk in and see a display of the beautiful fabrics. And in doing so, learn about the weight of the fabric, the way that it moves, the way that it looks, the finish, the feel and the mood of the fabric was something that I learned very early on. And to be able to distinguish between the different types of weaves, the different types of fabric contents, and where fabrics were made. So that was a really wonderful experience for me. And then for some reason I was very impressed with the notions. I liked the buttons because there's so much color and diversity and finish. I always enjoyed doing inventory of buttons. So yeah, I enjoyed working in the fabric store very much. One of the first things that we were asked to do, it was actually the part of the interview of the test to work at the fabric store, was to create your own apron. We needed aprons to carry our scissors and our notepads and our measuring tapes. And if you couldn't create your apron and sew it by hand, they gave you a pattern. And if you couldn't create your apron, you couldn't work there. So it was a really interesting first test.
How did you do this marriage between fabric and light?
Yes, I think that the fact that fabric does change its appearance when you expose it from the inside with light is one of the most interesting and challenging aspects of what I do. I can put something together and just adore the way that it looks before I turn it on. And then when I turn it on and notice there are lots of shadows, or the weave is just too loose and you can see too many light specks through it, this is the challenging part. So I think for me, when I look at fabrics and other materials that I would use to put together a piece of lighting art, the first thing I do is hold it up to light. And then that itself is also a great deal of diversity there as well, because we don't work with just incandescent light. We work with LED now. We have fluorescent, we have halogen, and everyone has their own personal preference about what kind of lighting they like to use. in their home and their environment, what is most pleasing to them. And so, interestingly, when a lampshade is completed, it will change color dramatically based on the type of light bulb that's used in the lamp. Great examples of this are the purples and blues. I recently shipped a lamp today, actually, that was purple. I guess you could call it purple. It was really more of a tanzanite color. And when an LED bulb is used, it is vibrant purple. But when an incandescent bulb is used, it takes on more of a maroon color. And so the personal preference is really what's going to drive what a person gets from a work, from a piece of lighting art. And it's nice to have that choice, right? If you grow tired of it being incredibly purple, you can simply put an incandescent bulb in it, and now it's maroon. So that's a really wonderful thing, I think, about this craft, is that it's not static. It's changing. It's malleable. And then there are also options of colored light bulbs. I've talked to many people who like to use pink light bulbs, and they like the color that it casts from their lamps. And so that adds yet another layer of complexity and opportunity to the art that just makes it interesting and fun.
Are there fabrics that are more resistant to light and heat?
Yes. I tend to use silk in my lampshades because silk, it doesn't catch fire. That's pretty significant. And, you know, the lamps in the lampshades of the past have been made with silk, and so I like to honor that tradition. I think there are artists who will use perhaps polyesters or satin linings, but I like the way that silk filters the light. And when you add dye to it and bring that color, it just becomes so rich and vibrant. It's nothing like it. And so, you know, some fabrics that I've used other fabrics in the past, they don't stretch across a frame as well. I'm obviously a big fan of silk, and I like the diversity in silk as well. You know, you can use a charmeuse, which has a beautiful satiny finish, and so when it's unlit, it glows, and when it's lit, it filters the light. There are crepes that can be used for this. I prefer the crepes myself. Chiffons, georgettes, and then this is where layering comes in. And if I use a crepe and I'm still getting too much light through it, too much light diffusion, then I'll perhaps put a chiffon over it to change the mood and intensity of the light that's coming from the shade itself. And then there's casting. Do I want the light downward cast? Do I want the light upward cast? You know, the frame has a lot to do with that, and the way the bulb is placed within the frame. So there's a lot to it. But, you know, to answer your question directly, I would say that I definitely prefer silk. A Victorian lampshades is a little bit of a misnomer. They really aren't Victorian at all. But that is what they're called. If people are looking for them, they tend to search for Victorian lampshades. And you'll notice that there's variety there as well. Many of them can have an Art Deco appearance. They'll have geometric straight lines. And there's nothing Victorian about that, right? When we think about Victorian, we think about a period of time where, you know, things were fairly elaborate, but mostly dark. You know, given the history associated with that. So people today do still call them Victorian lampshades, although they tend to have a great deal of variety. I use them for a steampunk look. I use them for Art Deco, Art Nouveau. I will do occasionally some Victorian. But I think about it in terms of not really having a lot of rules. So indeed they are called Victorian lampshades, but there is very little about them that's Victorian. The concept of elegance, from my perspective, it tends to be what you bring to it. If we were to dictionary define elegance, it would be a lot of straight, clean lines, and in many cases you'll look at items that are maximalist, they're elaborate and ornate, which may not really marry to the concept of elegance, but I think that really is what the person brings to the concept of elegance. From where I sit, I like the idea of things being highly decorative. I love the concept of functional art. I love that, you know, these are everyday objects that people use in their homes and expose themselves to every single day. And from my perspective, they should be beautiful. They should be elegant. They should be elaborate. And so I strive to do that with a balance that isn't overdone or difficult to look at. It needs to invoke emotion, and that's really basically the purpose of art, is to invoke a degree of emotion yet still maintain the functionality that you would anticipate from everyday objects in your life. So while some may say that item, that object is elegant, and others may say, well, I like something more austere or more clean line. I like to play in both arenas.
Each lamp is also a piece of art. So for example, the lamp behind you, I see 2 roses.
Yeah,
It's
this is actually
beautiful.
French. I had that sent, these are beads. This is not embroidery. I had that sent over by a friend named Flora in Paris. And oh, it's just so amazing. I'm obviously very passionate about French textiles. Makes me giggle. If it's a custom work for me, I will follow the customer's direction. I will ask them a lot of questions about color, style, mood, tone, and I will request photographs of the environment that it will sit in so that I can build to that. In terms of lamps and lampshades that I make, just for the pure joy of doing it, it depends on the inspiration. I have a few pieces that were directly inspired. For example, the Checkmate lamp was inspired by a movie, actually, that I saw about a woman who was a chess champion playing the game of chess. And I watched that movie and I was so inspired that I made a lamp that spoke to me in terms of what chess means, you know, the black and white squares, the pieces that look like pawns. And then another piece that I made was called Cathedral Window. The original was called Cathedral Window, and this was a Gothic style lamp that I had recently been in Europe and traveling and looking at the true Gothic cathedrals and buildings, and we don't have much like that here in the United States. So it caught my attention immediately, the architecture, and so when I returned, I made a lamp that spoke to what I saw there as the textiles would allow the best that I could. And so I created a lamp that had a silk stained glass window. and then poetry can be, you know, an inspiration for me as well. And I'm a fan of Edgar Allan Poe. I created a lamp called Nevermore, and it's not the fanciest, and it's certainly not the most expensive, but when you look at it, you really understand how the inspiration, you know, comes. That the lamp has ravens and locks and keys and darkness to it, and I just kept the inspiration in mind the whole time that I was creating the lamp, and I feel like it's representative of its inspiration. And so those are the most fun for me. I like to do custom work to get a sense of what people are looking for, and then try to do my best to create that for them. That's definitely more difficult than divining your own inspiration and creating something, you know, fresh out of your mind. I don't draw, so I don't sketch anything. One of the ways that I build is to look at the shape. I begin with the shape. What is the shape saying to me? And I've had situations where I've had a frame that had such an interesting shape that I couldn't figure out what to do with it. And so I put it on my kitchen table and I leave it there until I know. And I walk past it every day. I look at it every day. I don't force it, and I wait. And then suddenly I know what to do. And that's the process for me, is to wait for, it sounds crazy, but I wait for things to speak to me, to tell me what they want to be. And that's exactly what I do.
You mentioned strange shapes. What is the strangest you have done?
I don't know. I suppose that that the Nevermore lamp was definitely the strangest. It's very dark. It has colors that maybe you don't find every day in people's homes, and a person would really have to identify with the concepts behind the work in order to like it enough to want to bring it into their life. And so that is definitely the one that diverges, I think, the most from others that I have done. But it also brings me a great deal of pleasure because it is so unique.
These lamps that you are creating, would they also be used for people who are doing light therapy?
I really can't speak to that. I don't know about a medical perspective to that, but I can speak to the aesthetic and the emotions and the moods. I think that people seek this kind of art because it gives them a sense of comfort and beauty. And I hope I'm not the only person on earth who loves the idea of marrying utility and beauty. I think that that's something that you really don't see that much of it anymore. At least I don't. And I think for people who want to be surrounded by things that are beautiful, that just give them joy, I think there's a degree of therapy in that, honestly. If you're surrounding yourself with things that you love, then what else can result from that but satisfaction and happiness? Bead selection is a very personal choice. For me, I do have some personal preferences. I do enjoy using check beads, mostly because I enjoy the color consistency. I love their crystals. I have come to understand and know what I'm working with. Given that I can't fly to the Czech Republic every day, I have to have a great deal of trust when I'm purchasing online that the items I'm buying will match what I'm working on. And I tend to be an extreme purist when it comes to color matching. I want those colors to match perfectly. I do tend to want beads to glow. I've seen other works, in this field where the beads are more opaque. They don't light up or you don't see through them. And I'll use some opaque beads occasionally, but I really need them to glow. I need that light to turn on and just light up in a very different way than it looked when it was unlit. And so crystal does that quite a bit for me. However, I do really enjoy international offerings as well. I've used wrapped beads, antique and vintage wrap beads from France. I really like the way that they look. You don't see a lot of that anymore, and we're certainly not doing that in America. And so it's unusual. It adds a different flavor, a flair to a work that you just don't see anywhere else. I love some of the beads from India as well. They have some amazing clay beads and crackle beads. I love the vintage Venetian beads as well. They light up beautifully. They come in interesting shapes and sizes. And so for me, the piece is really going to define what the beads are. I make the piece before I put any thought into beads. I don't buy the beads in advance. I make the piece and then I ask, myself what beads are going to make this piece perfect. And then I go out and find them. Beads are a challenge, not because they take so long to string by hand, but which they do. But length is important, size is important, spacing is important, because if you don't get any one of those elements right, then you look at the lamp and there's something about it that doesn't quite look right. And they're made in lots, and so you really need to make sure you have enough when you start. More than once, I have been surprised and made a whole bunch of strands for a lampshade, only to find that I was short beads and couldn't get them. So that's a pitfall. You really need to do your math before you start stringing those beads, because they take days to string.
During the pandemic, did you notice a change in people's preferences?
I have noticed a little bit of a change. People want softness right now. They like the softer, muted colors. They're looking for, I've noticed a preference for blue. Blue tends to be a favorite color of the female population. So really that's what I've noticed the most, is a preference for a softening and a preference of a return to the favorites. There's a little bit less interest and excitement, right? I think we're already all over excited to a certain degree. And so people are looking for things that make them feel comfortable.
If someone wants to buy a set of lamps for their home, what kind of advice would you give
My
them?
advice might not be the same as what you would get from others, but I think that there are trends in home decor. Some people follow them, some people don't. I don't. I want what makes me happy. So choose what makes you happy. Surround yourself with what expresses, what brings you emotive joy or happiness. It isn't about blending in. It isn't about trending. You're the person who has to look at it every day. You're the person who has to use it. Love it. It's important to love it. And I think that's true with any type of decor that people put in their homes. If you don't love it right now, and you can replace it, do it, because it's just it's so uplifting, and brings a sense of lightness when you walk into your home, your personal space, and it's reflective of your own personality.
How do younger generations respond to Victorian lampshades?
I think that younger generations like them. I think that they find it interesting. You know, we're in a time where everything in society tends to be throwaway. The cost of goods has gone down, and there's an expectation that all things will be inexpensive and disposable. And obviously I'm operating in a very different space. I think that young people do love it. They are interested in it. I see this in social media platforms where you expect a younger audience. They do seem interested. And so they're, to a certain degree, responsive, but I do also notice that they're also based on the trends, the social trends, not decorating trends, that are going on in society today. So, for example, if young folks think that Gothic is their thing, they identify with that, they're going to be more drawn to the darker, the reds and the blacks and the angular shapes and things that speak to what they're personally identifying with. There are people who like cyberpunk and steampunk. Young people will identify with those types of products as well. But what I've found in youth now, today anyway, they are identifying a great deal with parasols and LED parasols in particular. And I think that this has to do with flow arts. Flow arts is trending among young people, where they're using light and LED to express themselves physically through movement. And so the LED parasols give them the opportunity to do that, because they can move around with an object that's lighted and incorporate that into their routines and their concepts that they're expressing today with regard to flow arts and flow of movement and flow of light. And I think it's wonderful, and I'm honored to be a part of it. Parasols actually happened by accident for me. They, when I make the lampshades, I have leftover dye and I feel terrible throwing it out. And so I try to reuse it. I'm looking for an old shirt or whatever I can use just to something to absorb the dye and use it and make something new. And I just happen to have a parasol around. And so I thought, well, that's cotton, let's try it. And it took off. I wound up acquiring a couple of additional parasols and, using the same color fade techniques on the parasols as I do on the lamps. And for me, it's terrific fun because the time investment in making a parasol is significantly less than it is in making a handmade, lamp shade and lamp. And so I can make them quickly when I'm feeling like I'm maybe stuck on a lamp project. I can just pop over and make a couple of parasols and just enjoy the break from it. And people have been so positively receptive to them. And I look at ways of trying to make them different by adding different kinds of embroideries, adding fringes and feathers. And I'm looking at beads now, but unfortunately they become very heavy, and that's not something that I think a person wants to carry around, something that's incredibly heavy. So I'm trying to figure out how to keep it moving and keep it interesting and not continually make the same thing. I can't stay in one space for a very long time, but because they're so popular and because it's so fun to carry around something that's lighted and it's basically a personal lamp. When you think about it, it has shade and it has lights, and so to me it's a lamp. And they're also functional, keeping you from getting a sunburn, and they help you look wonderful when you go to parties and events and you stand out in crowds. And I think that that's what the appeal is for the young people. Another additional appeal is that there's something so beautiful and portable.
Did you mention that you're dyeing your own fabric?
Yes. The lampshades, there are exceptions. There are one or two that I have done with pre-dyed silk, only because I wanted that richness of a color that I couldn't get anywhere else, and I didn't want to spend days trying to create the color. But I do dye all of my own lampshades, the majority of them. And so I decide in advance what I want the color fade to look like. So if I'm feeling like I really need to make a purple lamp, but I don't want it to be all purple, I might incorporate some royal blue or some turquoise or teal into it. And so now you have this multicolored, gradient fade, interesting and unique piece that you just simply can't find in a store anywhere. And then the fabrics themselves determine how vivid and vibrant those dye activities will turn out. For example, silk velvet will take color immediately, and it is extremely bright and extremely vivid. And so if I'm feeling like I want a really bright, vivid piece, I know that I should dye it, dye silk velvet to get those amazing colors. And you see that in the opal lampshade that I had done for a client. She liked it so much she asked for another one, and I like to say that they're one of a kind, but when clients ask for a second one, I'll make it. So opal 1 and 2 are examples of works that were dyed using very bright, vibrant colors on a highly absorbent, color saturated palette that really stood out and caught people's attention. Doing the subtle colors is it can be a little bit more difficult. Certainly less dye is involved, literally in terms of quantity. But then again, when you light it, the color does saturate. So that's a delicate balance, and I might use a different type of silk if I really want that color to remain muted. So it's an interesting challenge because each silk will take dye differently. Each type of dye, there are multiple varieties and brands of dye, will reveal itself differently, and then each lighting source will change the way that dye works, and so the way it appears. And so this is the challenging aspect to it, is trying, if you have something in mind in the end, an end state that you have in mind, you need to factor in what kind of silk, how much dye, what type of dye, and then what type of light will I use to achieve that effect. So there's a lot of thought that actually goes into it. It isn't simply, the creation of something and then it turns out exactly the way you expect it. They rarely do. I tend to lean toward vintage and antique embroidery and textiles. And the reason for that is they're amazing. The quality is unprecedented. You don't see anything like it today being made, certainly not available for purchase. The skill and time and work that went into creating these pieces makes me want to preserve these historic textiles and find innovative ways to reuse them. And that's why you see them on my works. You'll see, vintage and antique embroideries from the 1800s that's done on silk net. And I, restring that silk net over a silk underlayment on a lampshade so that it can last for years and years more and be enjoyed instead of sitting in a drawer. Obviously, the integrity of these textiles is important. I don't want to use something that's decomposing, but I think that work that has been done in the past, I could do nothing so amazing. And so I want to honor that historic tradition, that preservation of that beauty that is in itself, in my perspective, becoming a lost art. And that carries across not just the French pieces, which were so amazing, the Versailles period, but also, some of the Asian works like the Sioux embroidery of the early dynasties. The work there is absolutely incredible. The embroidery that's done with metal thread is astonishing. You don't see a lot of that today. And so to bring that into a work and marry it with modern, creating an anachronistic piece that somehow works is, to me, incredibly exciting, because I get the dual interest of preserving historic textiles, but also creating something new, by marrying the old and the new together to create a new work. Yes, there are themes, I think, and to a certain extent, in the works, the themes that you will see tend to include birds and fish and animals, and also florals. I really do enjoy the florals. From my perspective, there's very few rules, although I am interested in sharing this art with others, and so I do tend to create works that I think that they will enjoy. And so you'll find me incorporating elements into the pieces that tend to resonate with the type of person who would be interested in this kind of art. And a lot of the antique textiles were thematic, right? They included, they have been historically for centuries, they're inspired by art, nature, history. And so, that can include tapestries of, royal courts. They can include tapestries of, victories and conquests. They can include religious components and elements. There's so much to work with here that I'm open to it all. And so this gives me the opportunity to have a great deal of diversity in my work.
I see your husband, I saw your cat. Who are the people around you?
You just named them, essentially. It is true that this type of work is done in isolation and can be solitary, and even more so now, given the current pandemic situation. It is very challenging. I very much enjoyed traveling. I travel to Europe several times a year to find the textiles that I'm looking for use. And unfortunately, that activity has been very restricted. And so fortunately, I have a stock of items that I can work with. But I enjoyed going to Europe and speaking to the people who look at these textiles as treasures, right? And they've collected them over their lifetimes. They tend to be older people who, have a mindset and an awareness of the rarity of these types of textiles that I'm looking for incorporation into my pieces. And so I very much enjoy talking to those people because they have that same sense of appreciation for the items, that we're talking about here. But I think that it is a very isolated a type of art. It takes a long ramp-up time to make them. They're not something made overnight, and so that's a lot of time spent alone working on them. I tend to connect, I think, the best right now in the current conditions, through social media. There are many social media platforms that I find myself on, and each one has a different demographic, and so I try my best to connect with the people on those platforms in the way that I think that they would find engaging, but they often surprise me. They might be very impressed with some video I might have done on beadwork, or they may have no interest in the beads at all, but are more interested in a parasol, or they're more interested in a particular genre of a style. If, like I mentioned previously, they are closely individually identifying with a certain style, and so this will resonate with them. And so when they let me know, when I post content, which is essentially always images of lamps or the making process or things that I'm in work, and then they may comment and say, "Ooh, I would sure love to see that with, a certain type of bead or a certain type of theme." I like to hear their thoughts on what they think would look amazing. And there have been times when I have incorporated some of those ideas that they've shared with me into pieces to just so that I can explore it, right? So that I can take fresh ideas from others and bring those into pieces. Well, this brings me to a sensitive subject from my perspective, and that's free shipping. There are obvious conditions in the world right now which have led people to believe that shipping is somehow free, and frankly, it isn't. There's nothing about shipping that's free. If anything, the costs are increasing dramatically. Some platforms in which I vend my artworks won't even provide to viewers your material if you don't offer free shipping, which forces a person to, an artist to include the cost of shipping into your work, and without any knowledge of what that cost will be. And in my case, that's very difficult because each piece is a different shape, a different size, a different weight, and these things all determine the cost of shipping. If a person was selling on a selling platform, say cell phone case covers, I think it would be pretty easy to determine what those costs are. But when you're talking about the difference between a floor lamp, right, or a very small table lamp, it's very difficult to predetermine the cost of shipping. And I think that people do need to be mindful and set those expectations. Part of the problem with that adds to the cost with this type of product that I'm offering anyway, this art, is that it is delicate. Silk is delicate. The wire frames are tension set. The lamps are antique, right? And so they need to be packaged and wrapped with great care so that they are not damaged in transport and shipping, which means an increase in the size and the cost of the shipping. And so I think people need to take that into consideration. If anybody who's ever purchased anything that was, an antique, probably is aware of the fact that it's going to be packaged in such a way that it's going to, you're going to feel it. Yes, I have done some art fairs, mostly local, because I certainly don't want to ship anything more than once. I want the customer to receive it intact, and the only way to do that is to avoid a great deal of transport. I've done some festivals and fairs here in my state that were thematic. We do have Victorian festivals here. We do have steampunk festivals. And so I have taken some pieces to those events, and people enjoy them, but they want to talk, they want to engage, they ask a lot of questions. But I find that the transport of the items, given their fragile nature, is difficult. And I think I found that the risks outweigh the benefits, quite frankly. I want to keep the pieces safe until they're ready for their forever home. And so, hauling them around the country is just not something that is viable for me. And that's unfortunate, because I think that people love to see them in person. I mean, watching the people's faces when I have done these types of events, they like beautiful things, and this is something that's very unique and different that they don't see every day, and so it does bring a degree of interest. And so, if I could find a way to bring it to people, or the people to it, I would do that. But right now, given the current conditions, that is a restrictive opportunity. It's very restricted, and so I'm mostly online. I do invite people, if they're local, to come see them, and I've had a couple people take me up on that. But certainly from someone in outside of the United States, that would be probably very difficult, with exception to Southern Canada, because they're close to us.
What are you working on
Right now? I'm working on 2 parasols, 2 lamps. One is sort of a repeat of a style that's become kind of popular right now. The little bijou lamp that I've recently done is a miniature version of a full-size shade that is wildly popular. It doesn't seem to matter what I put on them. People just love the shape. And so I have one now that is similar to bijou, however, it's in a different color set. And I am adding some very interesting items to the shade that I've never done before. And I have seen, very limited this type of activity. I went in search of some vintage and antique pieces of jewelry that I wanted to incorporate into this piece, and I cannot wait for this one, because it's similar but incredibly different than anything I've done before. Another one I'm working on is a crescent shade. These are quite popular. People call them moon or crescent moon. I've done quite a few of them. They're very popular with people, and this will actually be a lamp and not just a shade. And I have the beadwork with me. Today, I'm going to be working on that beadwork and trying to string that out and see how I feel about the bead choices that I've made. It can be difficult, because one bead strand looks really wonderful, but then when you put it in scale, you have to ask yourself, does it really work? I'm wrapping up on parasols. It is September, October timeframe. It probably seems like a strange time to be making parasols, since it tends to be a summer thing. But I think that from a gift perspective, and also I could keep them in stock. I can make several and they won't sell out before I can post them. So it's a good time to be working and restocking on parasols, so that I'm really ready for next spring and wedding season and events and Christmas and gifts. And so I'm trying to split my time between all of those different pieces. I've just recently released about 13 parasols within the last few days, just to hopefully give people an opportunity to have something fun to walk around with on Halloween. Yes, I think that art is really what separates us as a species from all of the other wonderful animals on this planet. And if you're currently making art, never stop. Don't be dissuaded. Follow your own rules. Make your own decisions. Don't forum shop for acceptance. It's a personal thing, and if you pour your heart and soul into it, it's going to show. It's going to be an expression of yourself that no one can replicate. Sure, art ideas and concepts are stolen all the time. It happens to all of us, but it will never be as amazing as what is created by you. Don't stop. Don't be dissuaded. Continue making art, creating art, and putting it out into the world for as long as you can. I'm going to bring the shade to you so you can see this because I'm so impressed with this woman. This, I don't know how well you'll be able to see that, but these are tiny, tiny micro beads, and they go all around the shade, and they light up from the inside when you put light on them. These works were made in the early 1940s for a fashion designer in France, and he is deceased, but he had a wonderful collection, and his daughter is now selling the pieces. And when I saw these, I didn't care what they are so astonishingly beautiful. You just don't see this anymore. And whoever winds up having these in their life is going to be very, very privileged because they're just so astonishing. I don't think I could ever do anything quite this amazing. And so I'm glad that there are people in the world who did.